Dear colleagues, I think we can now start. Although more people are yet coming, we will keep on accepting them as we go. So allow me at this time, my name is Ladu David or Ladu Lemi, working for UNEP. It gives me a pleasure, or UNEP as a whole, to have you today for this meeting, which is in preparation for our forthcoming CBD SBI informal session, which is actually scheduled for next week. Before we start our discussion, just a couple of housekeeping rules that we'll have so that it guides us throughout the discussion. Number one is that you have to turn off your videos as the presentation goes on, as well as your audio, so that we don't get sound from behind. Point number two, we said also we have a chat room. In the chat room, you have to indicate your name for secretarial work and the organization that you are currently representing, whether a country or an organization. Number three, also, when the floor will be open for discussion, you will raise up your hand. There is an icon on the top of your screen where you can raise up your hand, and then the floor will be given to you. And once you are given the floor, you can now unmute yourself and give out your view. During the presentation, if you feel that there is a point that you would wanted to contribute to, you can also post in the chat room, either a question or a comment. Then we'll pick it up, and then the presenter will elaborate more. In case of any question, that's what I've just mentioned. So please, the event is also recorded just for your information, because we'll have to produce a report later on. So we'll want to follow up. As a result, we are recording the presentation throughout the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we'll have contact details for the project, where you would make a follow-up in case you wanted to make any follow-up and contact us directly. You will have a contact email at the end. At this time now, I give the floor to Dr. Balakrishna, who is the project lead of ACP MEA3 project, who will now take the floor and introduce and welcome you all to the session today. Dr. Bala, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ladu. Good afternoon, distinguished participants, national focal points for the Convention on Biological Diversity, members of the Africa Group of Negotiators on Biodiversity, experts, colleagues from the CBD Secretariat, colleagues from the African Union Commission, as well as the UNEP regional office, both in Addis Ababa as well as Nairobi. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome you all to this Africa regional briefing for the forthcoming CBD subsidiary body on implementation, the third meeting, informal sessions that are to begin on Monday, 8th of March 2021. My name is Balakrishna Pisapati. I work at the UNEP Law Division, focusing on issues of international environmental governance, and also lead the program for the Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific regions. And it's called as the ACP MEAs, which is currently in its third phase, supported by European Union in collaboration with the Organization of Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific States, OACPS. The ACP MEAs program is currently being implemented in all the countries in Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific, a total of 79 member states, and is being coordinated by UNEP with a number of partners, including in Africa. The focus of this program is to enhance the enforcement and compliance to multilateral environmental agreements that belong to biodiversity, chemicals, and waste and pollution clusters. On issues of ocean governance, where we collaborate with regional seas programs. The third component of the program is focusing on issues of agriculture and biodiversity that is being implemented by the UN Food and Agricultural Organization. We welcome this opportunity to join you all in this virtual session. As indicated in the briefing notes provided to you all prior to this session, the intention of organizing this session is to provide yet another opportunity for countries and stakeholders in the region to come together and discuss key issues that will form the core of the forthcoming CBD SBI 3 informal meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all aware that 2021 is considered as a super year for nature. And we within this group have an immediate task and responsibility to shape the global post-2020 biodiversity framework with its goals, targets, and implementation plans. In doing so, we recognize the need of contributions from each and every party to the convention, however small and big they are. As we convene here, we realize that we have close to 17 years of experience in discussing similar frameworks since 2002, when the parties first adopted the 2010 Global Biodiversity Targets. Subsequently, 2010 through the 2020 IG Biodiversity Targets. However, the current post-2020 Global Biodiversity Frame discussions are progressing with more opportunities and challenges to stop the loss of biodiversity and ecosystems that is threatening basic human survival. During this briefing session, we'll be joined by the chair of SBI 3 meeting, as well as the secretary to SBI 3 from the CBD Secretariat, who will provide some updates on how the informal session would be organized. Of course, because of a bureau meeting that is ongoing, they'll be joining a little later into this meeting. We are also delighted to welcome our colleagues from the Africa Group of Negotiators on Biodiversity who joined us during this particular briefing session. And we are very grateful to the group who actually agreed to be a part of this discussion and continue to identify opportunities of working together. To facilitate informed participation of delegates at this meeting and subsequently during the informal and the formal sessions of SBI 3, UNEP has prepared a number of agenda briefs based on the documentation made available by the Secretariat to the Convention on Biological Diversity. These briefs are intended to provide a quick overview of the issues and facilitate discussions during the meeting and subsequently. During this session, UNEP will be making a brief presentation, elaborating the elements of the issues that are intended for discussions at the SBI 3 informal meeting. And then we will also have an opportunity where the participants can provide their inputs, comments, and also discuss a number of questions and answers. We hope that this session would be a precursor for more interactions within the region and help further strengthen interest and input from Africa into the convention processes, including the finalization and adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. I'd like to take this opportunity to invite and request my colleague, Mr. Lewis Kavagi, the UNEP Africa Regional Office, to provide some remarks regarding the work of the Africa Group of Negotiators before we begin the session. Mr. Lewis, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Bala. My network is not strong enough to video. So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Lewis Kavagi. I coordinate the Ecosystems and Biodiversity Program of UNEP in Africa. I just wanted to give an overview of the linkage to the African Group of Negotiators. And luckily, we have a number of members of the core group of the Group of Negotiators online. Following the decision of African Ministerial Conference, it was agreed to set up an African Group of Negotiators on Biodiversity that would help to coordinate the African member states of the CBD and the Nagoya and Catalina protocols to be able to prepare themselves for Conference of the Parties meetings, as well as on other biodiversity matters that are of priority to Africa. The African Group of Negotiators has been chaired ably by South Africa, being the president of the African Union for the last 1 year, and it's now transiting, the chairmanship is now transiting to the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has assumed the chairmanship of the African Group of Negotiators. So, what what the African Group of Negotiators has done is to come up with a program of work or a work plan for carrying out its activities. And within that work plan, almost every month they have been meeting and discussing different thematic issues of interest or priority to the African member states, and also looking at how to prepare for various meetings. The meetings of the African Group of Negotiators have prepared very well for the first open-ended working group that was held in Nairobi, and the second open-ended group working meeting that was held in Italy last year. And now we are looking at preparing for the informal consultations on SABSTA, which were held a week ago before SABSTA. And yesterday we had a very productive meeting where the African Group of Negotiators discussed the various agenda items as related to SBI agenda that is coming up next week. So to make the work of the African Group of Negotiators easy, a small team was set up, which we call the core group. This core group is able to meet more frequently and then inform the larger group and also pass on the draft documents for the larger group to discuss and agree upon. Besides that, a number of development partners have set up what we call the Informal Biodiversity Support Group, which is led by normally the chair of the African Group of Negotiators is a member, but the partners are African Development Bank, UNEP, IUCN, WWF, and African Wildlife Foundation, NEPAD, and the African Union Commission. The Secretariat, of course, is hosted by the African Union Commission, with support from UNEP, being also the Secretariat of the African Ministerial Conference. So we are happy that we are able to support the work of the African Group of Negotiators. Usually we invite experts to discuss different thematic areas. And going forward, this session will be one of the ways in which, when aligned with the program of the African Group of Negotiators, it's one of the ways in which we'll be able to channel support. UNEP will be able to channel support to the African Group of Negotiators. For today, this is an information session that can help to enrich what has been discussed before, but it's not meant to replace the work that has been prepared. So just to clarify that this is an information session that is helpful, it's going to enrich the discussion and the drafting that has been done the rest of the week. It's going to be helpful for the rest of the week for preparation presentation. So thank you very much and welcome so much, Bala. Bala has been with UNEP for many years and is very knowledgeable on biodiversity matters. He has also a very rich experience from a country point of view, being responsible for national activities and policy and implementation matters. So we are very happy to have you back, Bala, after many years. And we look forward for closer collaboration with you. The African Union Commission, of course, has been very active in the AGN, but also in the ACP MEAs project. And therefore, this linkage is going to kind of make the circle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lewis, and thank you for those remarks. And certainly, as I mentioned earlier, we welcome the participation of experts and colleagues from the African Group of Negotiators, and certainly the intention of organizing this event and any subsequent plans to help countries enforce and implement a number of multilateral environmental agreements, including the Convention on Biological Diversity, we certainly look forward to working with the group as well as collaborate with the group as when we move forward. And before I begin the presentation that I mentioned previously, to provide you a bit of an overview on the key issues that are going to be placed for discussions during the informal SBI 3 meeting, let me also take a moment to recognize the participation of colleagues from the African Union Commission, who actually are key and important partners within the region when we are implementing the ACP MEAs III program. So we certainly value the collaboration and look forward to their continued support and interaction as well as and when we move forward. So with that, I'd like to make a short presentation. But before I do it, let me mention a couple of points for your consideration. Lewis mentioned that the Africa Group of Negotiators met yesterday to discuss about the informal SBI 3 agenda with some inputs into looking at the interests and priorities for the Africa region, and certainly would prepare for the forthcoming informal session. The presentation that you're going to hear is expected to complement the outcomes of that meeting yesterday. And that is why the presentation is slightly tweaked, because as you can see on the screen, a similar kind of briefing session was held for the Caribbean yesterday and for the Pacific today morning. But then we did tweak the presentation a little bit, realizing and recognizing the discussions that are already ongoing in Africa through the Africa Group of Negotiators. So my intention is not to focus so much on what is on the agenda for SBI 3, which I'm sure you have discussed, or several of the participants in this meeting have discussed previously, yesterday and before. But I'd like to focus on a few strategic issues that possibly could help the region prepare in terms of contributing, not just for the informal session of SBI 3, but also for the formal session, the third meeting of the open-ended working group, and also for COP15. And the points that are being presented are just intended to sort of elicit some responses and be used as triggers for discussions during this meeting. And we certainly welcome your inputs and comments when we open the floor for comments, discussions, questions, and answers at the end of the presentation. Ladu, can I have the first slide, please? Many of you are familiar with the key role played by the subsidiary body on implementation, where the third meeting is being convened in terms of looking at implementing the Convention on Biological Diversity as well as its protocols. The Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Protocol on Liability and Redress, as well as the Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing. And of course, as you can imagine, implementation is always key. And the forthcoming informal session is going to discuss a number of issues that are related to considering the experiences of implementation currently. When I say currently, 2011 to 2020, that includes assessing the implementation of the IG targets and the strategic plan for the convention, as well as looking at the effectiveness and impact of implementation of the Cartagena Protocol and the Nagoya Protocol as well. But having said that, there will be significant interest and focus on looking at implementation plans for the next cycle of the Global Biodiversity Framework, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which many of you are familiar is being discussed. And draft this from the second working group of the open-ended working group is available. And the discussions at SBI 3 would focus on how, once the global framework is adopted during COP15, we'll move forward towards implementation. A number of agenda items are on table that includes the focus on the implementation of the post-2020 framework, issues related to resource mobilization and financial mechanism, a very key and a critical point for countries to look at realizing the goals, realizing the targets that would be adopted in during COP15. There'll be focus on a number of cross-cutting issues that also support implementation, such as capacity building, capacity development, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication. Even though SBI 3 has an agenda item on cooperation with other conventions, international organizations, and initiatives, the informal session of SBI 3 will not consider discussions related to this agenda item, but it does discuss issues related to mechanisms for reporting, assessment, and review of the effectiveness of processes under the convention and the protocol, mainstreaming biodiversity within and across sectors, and other strategic actions to enhance implementation, and a very specific focus on two elements of the Nagoya Protocol. One that relates to dealing with specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments as elaborated or in the context of Article 4 of the Nagoya Protocol, and also issues related to global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism. And of course, for those of us who followed the adoption, the negotiations and the adoption of the Nagoya Protocol, we certainly would recognize the immense contributions made by the Africa region in terms of having that particular article on establishment of the global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism that you find place in the Nagoya Protocol. So certainly the inputs from Africa has been significant, and now we are going to be discussing the modalities and implementation of elements related to that. Can I have the next slide, Ladu? As I mentioned, the key focus would be on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So what it would consider, as I mentioned, would be how the framework would be implemented, including with focus on cross-cutting issues. But in as much as we would like to discuss on that, there will be discussions or focus on what is that we have learned from our past actions. Essentially, the last 10 years of implementing the 2011 to 2020 strategic plan for the convention and the Aichi biodiversity targets. What I've picked up, as you can see on the slide, is not a comprehensive list of where we are with respect to the Aichi targets, but certainly a very quick snapshot of a couple of points that possibly would be key and important as we move forward in our discussions. We all recognize that the implementation and achieving of targets has been uneven, and certainly the targets as a whole, we can say, has not been fully achieved. We did have some achievements related to the NBSAPs. Countries have revised and updated the NBSAPs, a good rate of success on that. The Nagoya Protocol has now come into force, and the issues related to protected area management and designation of additional protected areas are some of those what we call as islands of success within the Aichi Biodiversity Framework. But if you look at the strategic plan as a whole and the Aichi Biodiversity targets in its entirety, the 20 targets, we do recognize that we actually failed to achieve majority of the targets. And a couple of points, as you can see from the background documentation prepared by the Secretariat of Learning Lessons, are the following that you can see. It's only a 10th of the national targets are considered to be similar to the biodiversity target that are on track to be met, while another 10 had made no progress. And a very important point, because when we had similar discussions with the other region, for example, as I mentioned in Caribbean and the Pacific, one key point that emerged was the need for countries, or the ability for countries to discuss and come up with national targets so that the national level implementation becomes more effective. And the strategic plan for convention, as it was agreed in COP10, did provide an opportunity for countries to deal with it. But for some reason, we did see a lot of struggle in terms of countries matching to the ambition of the Aichi biodiversity targets. And it is very important for us to have it in mind as and when we agree on the new set of targets that are currently being discussed under the convention. The second point is the overall majority of national targets and our commitments contained in the NBSAPs are found to be lower than the Aichi targets, or did not address all the elements of the Aichi target. Again, a very, very important point for us to consider as and when we move forward, not only adopting the current goals and targets as they are drafted and are being discussed, but also look at it in the context of implementation as well. The next slide. Ladu, can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, so if so, a few bullet points for our consideration. Can we use the implementation experiences to assess the long-term strategic framework for implementing the post-2020? That will be a very important point of discussion at the informal and formal sessions of SBI. Is it important that we deal with the time lags and gaps in implementation? For example, I know according to the report assessment published by the Secretariat, it was as late as March 2020 when a majority, the number of countries have revised and updated their NBSAPs, even though the need for looking at revision and updating the NBSAPs was to be happening much earlier than that. A lot of experience in terms of identifying and agreeing on the indicators. We started this discussion in 2002 onwards, where we were assessing the speed with which we were able to get the indicators in place for the first set of targets and goals in 2002 to 2010. But certainly we did proceed forward in terms of making those indicators identified and also applying a lot of indicators. So certainly it's important for us to look at how some of those indicators, as we are discussing the new targets, could be used and what kind of adjustments, what kind of modifications would be required, and also looking at assessing the financial needs. And of course, I have one slide that discusses the issue of financial mechanism and financial resources. So certainly that's an important element to consider. And it's also important to consider the balance in terms of levels of ambition for achieving the post-2020 framework. Of course, all of us recognize that the goals have to be ambitious, the targets have to be forward-looking, and the indicators have to be smart and all that. But certainly it is time for us to discuss about, we did the same thing in 2010, but then for some reason we were not able to match up to the levels of implementation that we were expected to when we adopted the 2011 to 2020 strategic framework. So how is that we are going to be balancing that level of ambition that actually complements the global priorities and the national level on the ground situations? It's also important to identify options for focusing on issues of cross-cutting nature like capacity building, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication. And to an extent, even though these are very, very important tools or drivers for achieving effective implementation, to an extent, the amount of focus that we provide for these are still not optimal. And also, it's important to ensure national level synergies and cooperation actions that we need to start looking at how do they deliver. We've been discussing issues of synergies and cooperation among institutions and initiatives and international organizations for a long number of years. So it is very important to also assess and look at what is the experience we have gained through the processes in the last 17, 18 years, so that we can guide the implementation plan for SBI, for the Global Biodiversity Framework, to look at how these actions have been translated at the national level for delivery. The next slide. Resource mobilization, again, a very, very important topic, a key topic for the region, because for those of us who follow the discussions, or who followed the discussions during the AMSA ministerial meeting in December, and also the interventions made by the group at the Substat 24 informal briefings, very clearly the need to focus on resource mobilization and financial mechanisms seem to be a significant and strategic interest for the region. And if you look at the documentation that is made available through the SBI 3, the expectation or the estimates that are available for us is at a lower level, we require 103 billion to 178 billion per year. And the higher estimates are 613 to 895 billions annually. Of course, if you look at it in the context of the finances available across, they may not, the numbers may not look too daunting. But certainly it is important for us to, step back and see, we did have a similar financial requirement and an estimate done for the 2011 to 2020 strategic framework and the IC targets as well. But how far we have gone in terms of realizing those resources, And we know that we are not able to realize those resources. So how far it is prudent for us to start looking at some of these numbers before we start putting them on paper to make decisions at COP15. So a lot of options are being discussed, as you can understand. GEF 8, which is going to begin from 2022, is going to be an important option. Mapping and consolidation of available funds and putting them to better use is an important element, essentially at the national level, because all of us are familiar with the amount of activities that happen at the national level, to an extent also duplicating the investments. So it's important for us to be a little bit better prepared to assess the money available. Identifying options for a biodiversity fund. Again, an important point raised both at the AMSN and also at the regional meeting by the African, SBI meeting by the African group, with predictable funding and ease of operation. Developing a national financing plan, which is also an important recommendation that SBI 3 is trying to put on table. Making use of innovative financing options. Building specific capacities on raising financial resources, because that's something which I think countries and we need to also start looking at. You know, if corporate can do it, why can't conservation colleagues do it? So these are some of the considerations in terms of resource mobilization and financial mechanism. The next slide, please. Capacity building, the cross-cutting issues that I mentioned, technical scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, communication. The key considerations include optimizing capacity building, but more importantly, it's also important to look at retaining the capacities that are built. When I was actually working on a range of capacity building needs earlier, one of the points that I used to mention is that capacity building is like a bottomless pit. The more the capacities you build, the more the requirements are, because the situations are changing, people are changing, and also the way we operate keeps changing. So it is important for countries not only to look at optimizing the capacities that are built, but also retaining the capacities that are built. There is a discussion, you can see an information document that is made available in the SBI 3 meeting kit that looks at establishment of a technology transfer mechanism or an initiative, a very important point so far, to a large extent did not receive much of an attention from the parties, even though the discussions related to establishing a biodiversity technology initiative started in COP9 at Bonn, and a decision during COP10. We actually seem to have still not provided enough attention. I see a colleague mentioning that I cannot hear anything. I just want to confirm, Ladu, am I audible? Can you hear?
Yeah, it's okay. Maybe from the
okay, fine. Sure. Okay. It's also important to look at developing strategic partnerships and knowledge generation and knowledge management, including traditional knowledge, that focuses on mapping, acquisition, application, and impact assessment, ensuring communication to stakeholder groups that is effective and compelling. You know, we always find ourselves at a position when we are discussing climate change, that climate change receives more attention, more public opinion is on issues related to climate change, not on biodiversity, because we still have not nuanced and we still have not mastered the technique of giving that story in a more compelling manner. So can the new framework, can the new communication package for the post-2020 global biodiversity goals and targets come up with some ideas and some interventions that can make these a little bit more compelling for common people, public who can be a part of in race towards achieving the targets and the goals. The next slide. Yeah. There is also a discussion on mechanisms for reporting, assessment, and review of implementation. And certainly, all of us have enormous amount of experience in dealing with this. Certainly, key points to consider would be assessing the roles, commitments, and actions related to the post-2020 framework regarding report by other UN conventions, businesses, subnational action plans. Looking at the role of NBSAPs as instruments to communicate national commitments, and learning from the revision of NBSAPs in undertaking new revisions in response to post-2020 framework. It's also important to look at means to synergize reports, look at the periodicity of reporting and the related, but also consider the role and relevance of reports such as the GBO reports, IPBES reports, and suggest changes and the need for stock takes, the role for open fora, learning from voluntary peer review process, and issues related to that. The next slide. Of course, as I mentioned, there will be a focused discussion, which I'm sure will be of great interest to colleagues from the region, focusing on issues of the Nagoya Protocol that looks at specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments in the context of Article 4 of the protocol, and specifically with relation to paragraph 4 of the protocol, and also Article 10 of the protocol that looks at global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism. And of course, the key considerations could be a synthesis of information on how the specialized international AAS instruments are assessed in domestic measures and the views on potential criteria. So certainly that will be a very, very important element that will be on the table for discussion. And also elaborate on situations that warrant the need for global multilateral benefit sharing mechanisms. For example, situations where the prior informed consent cannot be granted, or it is not possible to get the prior informed consent elements of it. And also looking at the details of the possible global benefit sharing mechanism in terms of the contours of it, the operational elements and things related to that. The next slide. Yeah, go ahead, Ladu. Which is the last slide. So considering all of this, two questions that I'd like to leave you with is that what can Africa and the countries within Africa and stakeholder groups do to ensure the implementation framework for the draft 2020, post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is experience-based and be responsive? And what preparations are needed for implementing the framework once adopted? Two considerations, because the discussions next week will be focusing more and more on implementation. And we did have a lot of discussions on the science, technical and technological elements during the informal SBSTA meeting held several days ago. So I'll stop at that point, and I would like to open the floor for comments, discussions, questions and responses. I'm just told that the SBI 3 chair and the secretary of SBI 3 would be joining us soon. But I realize that a colleague from CBD Secretariat, Neil Pratt, is with us. So certainly, Neil, you are most welcome to make any remarks you may want to you may want to make, or we can wait for Charlotte and Jyoti to join to make their remarks. So Neil, would you like to say something at this point? Okay. Right. Okay. I don't see any response. So my colleague Ladu will be helping me in terms of identifying if you can raise your hands to make comments, provide inputs and suggestions, and share your thoughts and ideas on not just the presentation made, but also other issues that are relevant for the discussions on this in this particular forum. The floor is open for your interventions. Anyone like to take the floor? I see no hands up yet. Okay, colleagues, feel free to. This is an informal meeting, so certainly, feel free to come in and provide your inputs and comments. please come forward, and we certainly would like to have some good discussion happening. Yes, I see. I'm just trying to recognize the hand that is up. Ladu, can you? Yes, Monique Akulo from NEMA.
Yes, yes.
Go ahead, Monique.
Good evening. Yes, good evening, and thank you for your presentation. I noticed the area you are presenting on resource mobilization is very key. I'm going to be a speaker next week under resource mobilization on behalf of Uganda. And you mentioned very key important points, especially on the mapping and having consolidated funds, and then also developing national biodiversity plans, of which Uganda is part of the Biofin initiative. I think a few countries in Africa are Biofin initiative funded countries, and all of them have biodiversity finance plans, which highlight key financing solutions. And these solutions give us options on how to increase our resources towards biodiversity conservation, but also have innovating financing solutions. For Uganda, we have 8, and now we are going into implementation phase. And we hope these are some of the key areas that will give us opportunity to implement the objectives of the CBD. Of course, we are still implementing the previous strategic plan, of which has just closed. And we're now going to post-2020, and we hope that during the COP, we shall adopt and try to emphasize the use of the national finance plans, because it gives us a lot of, it expands issues to do with having the consolidated fund, the mapping of key stakeholders, because Biofin has a process of having to do a policy and institutional review, and then you do a biodiversity expenditure review, and then do a finance needs and assessment of the expenditure review and the gaps that you have discovered. And then, of course, it ends up giving you a finance plan and solutions on what to do next. So these, the broad finance plan is very key, particularly to the African region, because we need to expand our resource mobilization, because we cannot only depend on government funding. We have to bring in the private sector also. And then the issue of building specific capacities. We identified the issue of the banking sector not understanding why they need to invest more in biodiversity. This was also identified particularly in Uganda, but also as we were discussing regionally with the Biofin countries, that private sector was financing solutions in Uganda because they did not know exactly how to package the information and relate it, especially when it comes to funding. They say they need to see their money come back. But biodiversity is a long process to have conservation, to see the outcomes of conservation and protecting an area is long-term vis-a-vis seeing capital come back towards the bank. So these are some of the issues that we need to support Africa in, to have some specified capacity building towards the finance, economic, so that they understand biodiversity.
I think we seem to have lost. Monique, are you back?
Did you lose the? Have you been listening to me?
No, we just lost you for the last 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. I had already closed by saying I would stop here for a moment and wait for the rest to open up, so that we can have this. I don't want to monopolize the discussion, which is Africa. Okay.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Monique. Very, very in terms of not just building an understanding of some of these issues across sectors, especially finance sectors, as you mentioned, as an example, but also building the capacities to understand and invest in biodiversity conservation for the benefits of the industries themselves. I see, I'm just trying to check if other colleagues would like to take the floor. But if you do not think it's too rude on my part, I certainly would like to welcome and would love to hear from a colleague from Egypt, Mr. Mustafa Fauda, on some of his inputs and reactions. Sorry, Mustafa, to put you on the spot, but certainly I think your experience and insights are going to be extremely valuable. If you're there.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, Mustafa.
Do you hear me?
Hello. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Please.
I just joined you just a couple of minutes ago, and I need just to, I mean, the way how I understand, we are talking about the resource mobilization, right?
Yes.
What? Is it right?
Yes, correct, Mustafa. Yes, you are correct. Yes.
Yeah.
We just started the discussion.
Certainly, this is one of the most important issue in addition to GBF. We don't want to repeat the same mistakes in 2010 when we had a package of the three things. If you remember, Nagoya Protocol and the new strategy for biodiversity and the resource mobilization or whatever funding, and nothing really happened over 10 years, and we kept bothering all of the donors, but they keep asking many questions and things like that, and we responded to all of the conditions they said. That mean that what are the resources, are they efficient, where they come from, whether they are public or they come from outside, whatever, and nothing of this. So for the time being, I would say if we succeed in getting some specific fund for Africa, that could help to a great extent to mobilize these resources and implement the convention properly. Give me a little bit of time to think about what is going on, because I was in another webinar and I was very busy doing many things at the same time. I will come back to you. All right?
Sure. Thanks a lot. Mustafa. Thank you very much. And a valid point in terms of how do we look at predictable and dedicated funding that can be made available for implementing and realizing the targets that we are going to be setting ourselves up to at COP15. Any more comments and inputs from colleagues? Because I realize that the participants on this webinar have years of experience dealing with these issues, and certainly it's important that we hear from several of you on the participants list here. So please do share your insights and do share your comments and thoughts. And as I said, that's just an informal session, so feel free, please. Yes, I see a hand up. Malta, yes, I was just about to call you by name, but I'm glad that you actually read my mind. Please.
Thanks very much, Chair. The issue of resource mobilization is a very contentious one, in the sense that funding can be made available by the respective donors, but is ring-fenced with very complicated methods of accessing it. That's one point. Now we have made a big noise in putting together the GBF about the need for resources. What I am observing is happening is the fact that now the way the targets are being coiled is to put a burden on developing countries to implement them. We need to be very cautious of the fact that donors can make resources easily available, but they will catch us somewhere in the coiling of the targets to be met. Look at the targets that are set, for instance, for protected areas, the 30 by 30 issue. If you look at that, who has the land to do the 30 by 30? Who has got the waters in the marine environment? It's the developing countries, meaning what is being said is more a burden to the developing countries than anything else. Then the resources will be made available. They will be ring-fenced with processes that it will be very difficult to access. Once you access them, you will be having right in front of you targets that are unreasonable and unachievable. And you will be faced by a situation down the line that you didn't achieve what you were setting yourselves for. So those are the critical issues. For instance, when you look back, it's not only the issue of resources that hinders the implementation. It's the issue of resources, capacity, technical and scientific cooperation, the issues of land ownership, the rights. There are many issues. So we are going to be trapped in one way or the other. If the resources are released, the processes to access them will be more complicated. If the processes are less complicated, then the targets that are set for us will be very difficult to achieve. I just have that in mind, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. Very, very valid point, and I'm sure based on years of experience of not just identifying the sources of funds, accessing the funds, and also using the funds. So certainly very valid points, Malta. But certainly it's also quite important for us to spend a few minutes, if possible, in terms of how do we overcome this challenge? Yes, we know it is a challenge, and we sort of are faced with this time to time. But what is that we will do differently this time so that the kind of issues that we are faced with, or countries are faced with, does not get repeated? I mean, I'm just throwing it as a question for colleagues to think. But I also recognize the chair of SBI 3, Charlotte, has joined the session. And if Charlotte is ready, Charlotte, may I invite you to make some remarks as SBI 3 chair? We just sort of had the presentation, and also we started discussions on issues related to resource mobilization and financing. And I also recognize Monique Akulla would like to take the floor again. So certainly, yes, Monique, I'll give you the floor. But if you can bear for a few minutes, let's hear from Charlotte first. Charlotte, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Balakrishna. I hope you can hear me well.
Perfect. Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you thank you so much. I'm sorry I have came to this meeting a little late. I'm very grateful to participate today and listen to your reflections and views. It's very useful for me as SBI chair. I have been asked to just give a brief remarks on the preparations for the virtual meeting that start next week. So I will just start with just to repeat that, as you know, SBI has 4 functions and core areas of work. It is review of progress implementation, strategic actions to enhance implementation, strengthening means of implementation, and operation of the convention and the protocols. And the mandate for discussion at SBI 3 are to be found at several COP decisions, but also COP MOP decisions. And many of them also relate directly to the development of the post-2020 process, a new framework. There is also additional requests from the open-ended working group for post-2020, both the first and the second one. The overall strategic objective for SBI 3 is that is to prepare advice for the working group and the co-chairs of the working group of post-2020. Also to give recommendations to the COP15 on key mechanisms required for the operationalization and implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, but also on some other important draft recommendations to COP and to COP MOPs. I will just like to underline that SBI needs to conclude its work in order to provide guidance to the co-chairs. It is needed, together with the guidance from SBSTA, to develop the next draft of the Global Biodiversity Framework prior to a third meeting in the working group. I understood you already started to discuss resource mobilization is one of the important discussions that we will have at SBI 3. It's also discussion on capacity building, mainstreaming, and enhanced implementation and reporting and review. That also linked to the new development of new framework. But also other issues, of course, are great importance, like the one developed that is linked to the protocol issues. Some of you may have participated. There has been several informal webinars related to different SBI agenda items. And the purpose of those webinars have been to assist partners and observers to be familiar with the documentation of SBI. You can find recordings of the webinars at CBD webpage. It could be helpful for those who did not take part in the webinars. And as I said, I do really hope that the meeting, the informal virtual meeting that will start on Monday, the 8th March, will help keeping momentum in the process. It will include intervention on the pre-session documents for agenda item of SBI, but as said, this is an informal meeting. It will not be a negotiation session. It will be a procedure report, but it is an important and good opportunity to listen to each other, learn from each other, hear what other views from parties and observers, and I hope really that this will help us all in making progress in the process. And as I see that the Secretary of SBI, due to Mette Philippe from the CBD Secretariat, is also here. Maybe you can say something about the more logistical part of the meeting. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful to be here today, and I'm very interested to hear your views. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotta. Jyoti, welcome and thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Bala, and apologies from my side for not joining the meeting yesterday in the beginning. It is in my calendar for today, not yesterday, but I was there for about 40 minutes or at least 30 minutes last night. So just to follow up from what Charlotta said, to give you a little bit of a background on the logistical aspects of the meeting, as you know, we are using the Interactio platform, and that platform has now been used for meetings, informal meetings in September, in December, and now the SBSTA informal. So I think that people are, parties and observers are getting slowly used to the platform. I think SBSTA went very well, and so we are. We hope that you will have less difficulty in joining the platform and providing your interventions. At this point, may I make a plug for some of the work that we want? We really need to know up ahead of time which country is going to make a regional statement so that we are prepared, and it's included in the choreo. So if you could let us know who will be making statements for each of the regional statements for each of the agenda items, we would be very grateful. We also want to remind you that it is good practice to to have a backup for not only your regional statements, but your party statements also. At this point yesterday, when I was making this intervention for the Caribbean, my screen went blank and my internet dropped. So it happens to all of us. So just to request you to also make some backup arrangements. I also want to inform you how we are going to do statements after the Secretariat has introduced the agenda item and the chair opens the floor for statements. We will first take regional statements, which are for 5 minutes maximum. And the chair has said that she will be quite strict in cutting off statements over the time limit. We will then take 3 minutes each for party interventions, and just to once again reiterate, as was done in Substan, as has been promised to the COP Bureau, we will take every party statement that any party that raises their hands, they will get an opportunity to speak. We just request you to keep your statements within 3 minutes, to not perhaps repeat things that have already been said, not to thank the Secretariat and the chair, etc., so that we can save time, and to speak slowly in terms of for the interpreters, because if you speed up, the interpreters will not be able to translate into the other languages. We also have a new system for uploading statements. So I think this has been sent to everyone and is included in the priority pass. So you can upload your statements ahead of the time. And so here we have also added one new feature, which is if you are making a regional statement, you can click a button and it will show us that it's a regional statement. Regarding the platform we did have training sessions yesterday at 6:30 a.m. Montreal time and 6:30 p.m. Montreal time. So I hope some of you got the opportunity to join those training sessions so that you become even more familiar with the platform. And also, if your internet is not very good or you have issues, technical issues, you may already have the opportunity to find other backups. As we said, this informal session is an informal session. There will only be a procedural report, and it is to maintain momentum to the SBI 3 the work of the open-ended working group and the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as for the decisions that will be adopted at COP later this year. Finally, just to remind you that all information is available on our website. You can go to the SBI page, and there you also have a link for the informal meeting, and that link will take you to the scenario note that has been prepared by the chair, and she may already have requested that it might be a good idea if you read the scenario note, that as it provides a good it will provide you with an idea of how the organization of work will be organized at the informal SBI session next week. Thank you so much, and I'm here to answer any questions for clarification.
Thank you, Jyoti, and once again, thanks to you as well as the chair of SBI 3, Ms. Charlotte Sokvist, for sparing time and joining us. So we'll now move on to the discussions where we left. We started the resource mobilization discussions, and I see two hands up, one from Mr. Francis Ogwal and one from Ms. Monique Okullo. So Ms. Francis, you have the floor, sir.
Hello.
Yes,
Can hear me?
we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good afternoon. Could be good evening already. Some places. Francis is my name. I'm a co-chair of the post-2020 Biodiversity Framework. My other co-chair is Basil Van Haaf from Canada. Just to say that I'm listening in to your discussion, but as a co-chair, I may not be making any statements, but I'm taking note of your discussion. That is just what I wanted to thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We do recognize the important and the difficult task that you're handling, Mr. Ogwal, along with Mr. Basil Van Haaf. So thank you very much, and certainly the discussions we hope will be helping you as well. Ms. Monique Akulo, NEMA, you would like to take the floor now?
Yes.
Go ahead,
thank
please.
you. Yes, thank you once again. I wanted to go back to what Malta was, what she had submitted, and Malta's fears are really a big concern for the African region. But I think we should not be so worried about being boxed when it comes to having the issues that Malta raised. One of the issues that we need to try and undertake, especially at national level, is having the frameworks and the policies and the plans work for us, especially when it comes to biodiversity. Our NBSAPs are the guiding principal instruments to ensure that all key stakeholders participate and understand the way the strategic objectives are being developed. And your national target should really tally with the Archie targets, which Uganda did fairly well, actually very well, from our report from the CBD, and also the voluntary peer review, of which we received the comments very well. And those are the areas that help a country assess itself and understand if it had strategic partnership well developed, or need to go back and understand what were the areas that had failed. And then also mainstreaming all these objectives and plans through the development plan, through the vision, the SDGs, and also the Rio Conventions. There's a lot of work behind the scenes that the country has to do before we even reach to the level of identifying issues to do with resource mobilization. Because once we don't get it right at national level, we cannot reach at global level and start blaming ourselves or fearing to understand that we made an error at national level. So at global level now, we can't reach there and start saying we cannot undertake resource mobilization, or we cannot find key areas that we can have. It is very key. We need to be very strategic and very keen in understanding where the global financing mechanism is going, like the GF8 is now coming. So upon understanding the national issues and where your national development plan is going, it can guide you on later developing the key issues or strategic objectives that Africa can go with and collaborate with. So we need to understand those key areas. Even the national six national policy coordination, but we had done wrong and not well in reducing biodiversity loss and conservation. So that means we go back to the drawing table again. And during the development of our national development plan, this guided us. It is about understanding the key areas that we had failed in our implementing the NBSAP. Then that would guide us. So I think the issues around resource mobilization are very political sometimes. We need to understand the political game, because biodiversity has now become political. It's about economics, but also where the country will place its money vis-a-vis economic transformation, because Africa is transforming. Each country, each party in Africa is transforming in a way that it understands. Now COVID has come in, we need to understand which stimulus package will ignite an economy but not lose its biodiversity nature that we depend on. So thank you. And I'll wait for more comments and enjoy the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Monique Akullo. Are there any further comments or inputs into that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would like to just add something extra.
Please,
Hello?
Mr. Mustafa.
Yeah, I
Yes,
agree
go ahead.
with. Yeah, I agree with Malta, what Malta said already, and even Monique as well. We have to differentiate between sources of resource mobilization and actually how can we be efficient in making use of these resources. At the same time, we have to know how much it will cost. I mean, for example, I think they fool us by saying 30 by 30% is very cost benefit. It will be like 5 to 1. You need 1 point something billion dollar every year. I don't believe this is true for the marine protected areas, because as you know, marine protected areas are very, very costly. This is happening at a time where all marine resources around Africa is underestimated and being abused by developed countries. I think it is time that you can tell them very clear that our policies is going to change toward who are abusing these resources to great extent. So maybe, and as far as I know, that there is a study already going on about how much is needed to implement SABs in Africa. I don't know whether they have taken a decision on that or not, but certainly it will be useful to know and compare this with what figures that come to us from all different kind of institutions. Sometimes they tell you we need $400 billion. Sometimes they say $200 billion. We need to know if we want to do a minimum implementation of MSAB in Africa. Is it going to cost $1 billion or $10 billion or $100 billion? And then we can say where that money come. And so I agree with Monica on that issue as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. I think very valid points. But certainly, I'd also like you to start thinking about how do we address this challenge. Yes, these are issues, these are challenges, but how do we overcome that? Because certainly, when we discuss the terms of reference for some of these, studies or reports, the focus is on just to find out how much it is going to cost, with an expectation that we will know the figure that is required, and then we will work towards achieving those figures. But our experience have shown that we do have those numbers with us, but the challenge is translating what is required into translating what is available. So certainly we need to find some mechanisms, we need to find some innovative ways. Our experience certainly shows that there are opportunities, but we still, personally to me, have not reached that optimal scenario yet, where we can confidently say that yes, we'll be able to raise at least 20% of that figure, 10% of that figure yet. So to a certain extent, it's a combination of an aspirational requirement for achieving the goals and targets, and that is combined with the reality on the ground as well. And that's why I think the SBI, if you look at the background documentation, is also suggesting the need for having a national financing plan. But certainly, we have had these discussions before, including in COP10 and COP11 on dealing with this. Distinctly, if you remember the outcomes of COP11, that was also a requirement when the additional resources were made available for implementing the Aichi targets as well. So it's a point for thinking and discussion, and certainly, if it is not us, who is going to find the answers for some of these questions? So certainly, thank you very much. Are there any further inputs or reactions, comments to this particular agenda item? A very, very important agenda item, not just for the region, but also for all the contracting parties to the convention. Any more inputs and comments at this time on this agenda? But of course, you're most welcome to come back to this agenda if you feel like. We'll certainly then in that case move on to other issues. Are there any comments on other agenda items that will be a part of the SBI 3 informal meeting next week? We discussed issues of mainstreaming, issues of capacity building, the cross-cutting issues, capacity building, technology transfer, knowledge management, communication. And to an extent, they're also extremely important in terms of delivering what we want to deliver post 2020. So any reactions, inputs, and comments on those elements of the agenda? I'm sure we will definitely have colleagues who can provide some inputs and views or comments on these issues. Yes, I see a hand up. I'm just trying to recognize on my screen. Yeah, is it Monique? Oh, I see three colleagues, Malta,
Yes.
Issa, and
Yeah.
Malta, you have the floor, followed by Issa and then Monique.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks to the colleagues for the comments. On this issue, I think it's more about understanding what the actual issue is. When they say capacity building, scientific and technical cooperation, we tend to think it's something somebody is gonna bring most of the times. And there was that issue a long time ago, which was called South-South cooperation. I don't know where it went, where we could assist each other with whoever has got anything that the neighbor doesn't have. Then the neighboring country can cooperate with another one, you know, those kind of sharing resources, sharing information, sharing research, the more national facilitation of how you as a country cooperate with the neighboring country or any other country on technical and scientific issues, on research issues, on use of technology, on sharing of capacity that is available. For instance, there might be capacity in South Africa which is not available in Botswana or vice versa. There might be capacity in Burkina Faso which is not available in South Africa, those kind of things. How do we identify the partners that we are going to cooperate with? I think it's more empowering the countries to identify suitable partners and share information, share technical expertise, share technology, etc. Then somebody else might come as a third party to assist where we have tried to facilitate and assisted ourselves. But I think the misunderstanding comes from the fact that once there is a mention of capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, we think somebody is going to arrive in a truck carrying these things and delivering them to us, which is a big misunderstanding of these concepts. I just wanted to raise that we need to approach it on that side as well. How do we use effectively what we have? And with other people, how do we facilitate cooperation and coordination amongst ourselves before somebody else comes to help us? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Martha. Very, very pertinent points and very important points, which always gets discussed. Because who can identify the capacity needs? Who can identify the technology needs other than the country that actually needs themselves? Because countries are best placed to identify what is required. But what is also important is the map of the so-called matchmaking in terms of where is available and also ensuring that it is matched to those who require that kind of technology of capacity. And certainly, I'd certainly like to invite all of you to have a look at the background documentation that's available on issues related to technology transfer, because there's going to be a significant discussion in terms of identifying the mechanisms, identifying the initiatives related to technology transfer much more strongly than before. Within the convention process now. So certainly have a look at it, and there are very good pointers that we may want to reflect and focus on. As we keep thinking about it, may I give the floor to Issa Karpesege, who has asked for the floor, followed by Mr. Monique Akulo. Mr. Issa, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. Just like someone who spoke previously, mentioning that that actually today's meeting is missed the yesterday's meeting. And on my part, actually, I also had this meeting on today's program. So I'm not exactly sure what I missed for yesterday. But of course, I'll be making a submission, a statement on behalf of Uganda on assessment and review of the effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. And when I looked at the agenda items listed here, I found it missing. And of course, it would have been very interesting on my part to know exactly what the other stakeholders or the other states or colleagues think about that particular agenda item. But if it was covered for yesterday, it will be good to know exactly whether it's possible to have a look at what was discussed during yesterday's meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Issa. I'm sure colleagues from the AGN would be providing you inputs into that point that you raised. Certainly, yes. Ms. Monique Akulo.
Yes, thank you again. I wanted to comment on the issue of capacity building. Actually, Malta just ignited the South-South cooperation. It didn't die, but I think it happened more in the biofilm. During the time when we were implementing biofilm, we did give support, or we cooperated with Rwanda when they were beginning their project, and we gave them some support, and also gave Zambia some support. And then during the regional meetings, we also were providing each other that support to implement the project. Because initially, before the projects began, the biofilm global project, it was very hard to really understand how you would start the whole project and get the policy review, institutional review. And then when it came to identifying the biodiversity expenditure reviews, which strategic objectives did you use? And quickly we had to support them because we understood the project dynamics faster. So the South-South cooperation is still happening. It's just that it is sometimes silent among the African states, but needs to be shared and reported, especially reporting. Once you don't report that you have not shared any cooperation with the country in terms of a project or a research, then it will die out, and that will not be captured, and yet it is actually happening. And then also when it comes to bettering the science policy practices, we've also noticed that we identified one of our financing solutions under the biofilm, ecological fiscal transfer. And we discovered during a global meeting that actually ecological fiscal transfers have been happening in Brazil, in Germany, in India, and we did not know about this until the meeting, and we now came in and tried to discuss with the colleagues to communicate more about the ecological fiscal transfers, how it works, and soon we shall come up with a paper on how to implement ecological fiscal transfers, of which Uganda is going to implement it as part of the financing solutions, which can increase resources, especially at local governments. I will not dive deep into the EFT, how it works, but those are the key areas that countries need to understand, that the science is seated somewhere in it, but has not been communicated with the world. So one of the gaps that we discovered with the researchers and the the professors, is that they have kept the information to themselves and written a lot of nice things. And I was telling them, this is the time for us to start talking about EFTs. How can countries use ecological fiscal transfers to increase resources, but also capacity needs to come in to understand which index are you going to use. So those are some of the things that we can better the science policy practice interface. But also when it comes to mainstreaming now, I'll go into mainstreaming because I think we're about to run out of time. Mainstreaming for Uganda's case, we have been mainstreaming. We have mainstreamed our NBSAP. We mainstreamed it in the NDP2. Now in the NDP3, it is even stronger, bringing in all the green development, biofin, because of course the biofin finance plan has to support green strategy, which was very strongly indicated there. So mainstreaming is a continuous process. It cannot stop now. And so countries need to continuously track their development plans so that we can be able to mainstream at strategic times. Like during the development of our NDP3, we identified, we already had our gaps that we had assessed from the national plans, from the voluntary peer review. So all this information gave way to mainstream some of the issues. For example, the climate change, emerging issues like invasive species. So these are the things that came up in our national development plan. So mainstreaming should be a continuous process and not just a one-off that, okay, we have mainstream and let us continue there. But also at the end of mainstreaming, we have to track. So that means, hello?
Yes, go ahead, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes. We can hear you. Please go ahead.
I think something went wrong. Something went wrong. Okay.
No, Ms. Monique, we can hear you. Monique, we can hear you.
Something went wrong.
No,
Hello?
you're fine. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Let me finalize since now internet is playing tricks on us. I was saying that by mainstreaming, we have done the mainstreaming, but okay, all right. At the end, we have to try and monitor what we have mainstreamed. And so monitoring and assessing and reporting our progress is very critical, especially at national level. And so we have to ensure that
Yes, Ms. Monique, we lost you. Hello, Ms. Monique, are you there? We seem to have lost you. Okay, let's give a few moments for Monique to conclude.
All right.
But in the meantime,
all right.
Yes,
so
go ahead. Yeah,
to understand that we have. Yes, I'm there. Can you hear?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I was saying that as I conclude that monitoring of these targets or indicators that we have mainstreamed into all the development plans have to be tracked. And so monitoring frameworks have to be developed. And I think for Uganda's case, we are on track. We are trying to develop a monitoring a framework for the NBSAP so that we can easily track progress of the strategic objectives and then report them better than the previous the previous strategic plan of the biodiversity conservation plan. So we expect the post 2020 to be tracked better than the previous one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Quite comprehensive, and certainly the point that you raised that mainstreaming is an agenda that has to be kept constant. It has to be all the time there when we are discussing the CBD, and that is why, if you remember the outcome of COP11, there was a decision that mainstreaming biodiversity would be an agenda that would be a part of all the future COPs, then on. So certainly an important point. Any more inputs, comments, ideas and suggestions from colleagues, please raise your hand so that I'll be able to recognize who is asking for the floor. I'm sure that a lot of participants have enormous amounts of experience. So any more hands, just not on the issue of mainstreaming, but any other agenda item that is a part of the SBI 3 informal meeting next week?
There is someone with a hand, Bala.
And I'm just trying to see, Mr. Mustafa Fauda, do you want to take the floor?
Yes, please, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, please
yeah.
Go ahead. Please go ahead. Sorry, I could not see you on the screen. Sorry about it. Please go ahead.
I would like to just give a little bit of reflection on what Monica already said. Regarding the research, I think it is time now that we in Africa have to tell the researchers that they have to have what we call paradigm shift in the way how they conduct research as well, to be able to respond to all of the issues that keep being updated, whatever, etc. And what I would suggest at this stage is to ensure in the recommendation that some recommendations should be directed to the researchers in a way that they respond to all of these issues. This is number one. Number two, mainstreaming is being done, or shall we say, since even the convention. I mean, we have several articles that deal with mainstreaming, but after almost now 30 years, where are we now? I mean, the way how I understand mainstreaming is it is a very long-term process. It's not only, you could say that we have done mainstreaming. That's not true, because if you go through the steps of mainstreaming, starting with sitting with different sectors, identify what are the problem, how can you resolve issues through early warning system, whatever, etc. This is a very, very complicated process and takes time. At the same time, need a lot of resources as well, because you have to convince all relevant sectors to sit with you and not only to agree, but to implement what you agree, whatever, etc. So this is the sort of thing that we should keep thinking about the mainstream. That's why I agree with Monica when she said that there is a need for monitoring of mainstreaming in a way that targets dealing with this issue should be done properly. The same thing when Malta raised the issue of capacity building. It is an ongoing process, because all the time you have new things. I mean, how much we know about synthetic biology, for example, how much that can affect us. I mean, the issue of COVID-19, for example, is causing a lot of problem for the time being, and we don't know whether this is genetically modified organisms or what, and people get confused whether they will take the vaccine or not, depending on where they come from, whether from China, from England, or Britain, or US. It is very, very complicated. Again and again, if we try to look at Nagoya Protocol, for example, it took a long time to agree, and whoever attended COP 10, we remind each other that the last evening, everything was changed, where the minister of Japanese Minister of Environment just came up with a new text, and we were fooled. I mean, we have to recognize that, because how much progress already have been taking over 10 years period now, or 11 years now. I mean, we need to be very tough this time in all of these issues, whether they are resources or whether capacity building or whether mainstreaming. And this is the time that all of us now are much better than 10 years ago. I mean, I should thank everyone that participated over the last few months in the whole process. And now African Union should be very proud of what those African negotiators group did over the last couple of years. So we have to appreciate all of this, but at the same time we have a lot of work to do together, in a way that we must have a tough interventions that reflect African needs, because if we are going to be fooled again, especially if we are going to implement GBF, for example, someone has to tell me how much it's going to cost. I mean, 10 years ago, we were talking about $400 billion all over the world. Now, if you are going to extend this to 30% of protected areas, God knows. I mean, the costs in marine environment are so very, very expensive and very high. And if you add this another pressure that will come to us very soon, I'm talking about the new high sea treaty. I mean, I'm talking about UN new convention on the conservation of marine resources beyond national jurisdiction. This is another burden on us, because they have technology, they have resources, but we don't have the resources to be able to benefit. So the whole issue of sharing benefits should be considered a little bit better than, and we have to find alternatives for that as well. Not only to be tough, but what will be the plan B, for example, if something like that happens. So this is the way how I see things for the time being. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hoda. Very pertinent points. We have Mr. Lebaga. You have the floor, please. Mr. Lebaga, can you hear us?
He's muted.
No, you're muted, Mr. Lebaga. Yes, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, I say I'm particularly concerned with agenda item number 9. In fact, without minimizing the other agenda items and resource mobilization and capacity building, I'm very much this time around concerned with what should be done as far as reporting, assessment, and the review of implementation of the GBF is concerned. That's agenda item number 9. That's an item that is most often minimized, but in my opinion, I think it's an item that we should actually consider this time around, because without appropriate reporting mechanisms, without appropriate assessment reporting, it would be difficult to actually assess the level of implementation of the various targets that would be outlined in our post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So in my opinion, and in support of the view of on reporting that was raised in COP 14 in Sharm el-Sheikh, I believe that proper reporting should actually be a major aspect to be considered. I attended the workshop on data reporting tool, a new tool on the reporting from Informal, which I think, in my opinion, the African continent as a whole should follow that pattern of reporting in order to have, a true picture of the level of implementation of the various objectives of the GBF that will be outlined. In other words, I'm saying that we should actually follow up the implementation when we would have adopted the various indicators, which of course is something we also have to talk to. There should be a good reporting mechanism where each country should report on the basis of the indicators outlined. such that it could be easy for a true picture of what is actually happening across the region from the basic indicators that would have been outlined. And I think there is a tool, the data reporting tool, which I think should actually be given a lot of consideration this time around, which gives us a platform where information can be reported across the various conventions, you know, in a synergy, such that somebody reporting on, for example, the Convention on Biological Diversity would collaborate effectively with another person reporting on the Convention on Migratory Species or on the Ramsar Convention in a way that reporting can be in a synergy such that, you know, it will be simplified. We will not be reporting on the same issue from the same country or from the same region, but giving statistics that are contradictory because we don't have a synergy in reporting. I think agenda item number 9 should be given due consideration this time around. And the mechanisms for reporting, assessment, and review of implementation should actually be given an extra look. So in my opinion, that is where I want to, you know, concentrate on this time around on reporting as far as the Global Biodiversity Framework post 2020 is concerned. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. That's my submission.
Thank you, Mr. Labaga, for reporting, assessment, and review. Because many times the reports are the ones that enable a lot of us who actually are not directly involved in implementation to pick up the signals, whether we are doing the right thing, whether they are being done on time and enough, effectiveness, so that the impact can be long-term and it can be felt. Certainly an important point, and I'm sure colleagues would definitely reflect on these. We do have a few more minutes before we conclude the session. I would certainly give the floor to colleagues in case if they are interested to provide more inputs and more comments on the agenda items on table for SBI 3, the informal meeting next week. Are there any any more colleagues interested to take the floor? Good. Okay, maybe should we have a minute more before colleagues make up their mind to speak? To an extent, I think most of the agenda items we did cover, and inputs have been quite useful, not only for individual countries, but also for the region. Yes, Pierre.
Thank you, Bala. Thank you, Bala. I had to unfortunately leave the meeting, so I missed the central hour of it. But since there is a little bit of time, I thought I would just have a quick, make a quick contribution. And I really think that what we need to do more than anything else is to keep our eye on the big picture. This is, I think, the last best opportunity that the world has to save biodiversity, right? This is not, and that is why we've signed up for a process that will bring about transformational change. And that transformational change needs to be at all levels, right? It actually cannot continue the architecture of multilateral environmental governance as it has evolved since Rio, because that has clearly driven us to this point of very nearly being in a disaster zone. And I think it's very important that Africa continues to insist on a well-balanced treatment of all of the objectives and provisions of the CBD in the global framework. The way it is at the moment, there's a very strong emphasis on conservation, on protected areas, on market-driven instruments for raising resources and so on. And basically, it perpetuates a mistake we made, and we have been making for 30 years almost, right? Of setting up things that are not inherently sustainable because they're not inherently supported by the people on the ground who live with biodiversity day to day. Of trying to do things that cost a lot of money without having the resources to do that. You know, and I mean, you know probably better than most people that I've always insisted that the reason the CBD is not achieving what it was designed to do is because it is not paying it sufficient attention to benefit sharing, to providing an economic driver for sustainable action. It still pays more in most countries. It pays better to destroy nature than to protect it. And to bend the curve, to make a really transformational change, it's absolutely essential that we get that right, so that we get enough benefits from sustainable use so that we get good conservation outcomes. That is really the only way that we're really going to save the whole situation, in my opinion. Anyway, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Pierre. Very important point, and certainly, you know, we have heard so much of these issues and the need for considering the contributions that benefit sharing could, provide to not just the access and benefit sharing component of the objective of the convention, but also for conservation and sustainable use and management. But then, I would like to recall that, in 2018, along with a colleague, when I did a review of 160 national biodiversity strategies and action plans, looking at what was different from the earlier version, looking at what happened post 2010, I was not able to pick up more than two NBSAPs. One was that of the European Union, who actually have identified the issue of benefit sharing as an important element that countries need to focus on in supporting the overall objectives of the convention as well. So certainly an important point for us to have in mind. And the point of balancing, is critically. And of course, the big advantage we have as of now is that we know that we still have time. Even though the COVID pandemic was a very unfortunate incident, but it did provide us a lot more of time than before in terms of reflecting on these issues and ensuring that we get the next iteration of the strategic plan, the Global Biodiversity Framework, that definitely would speak up to some of these kinds of, I won't say aspirations, but realities in terms of ensuring that we do not continue to lose what we are losing, and we end up in 2030 having a similar discussion that, oh, sorry, we have actually failed again to realize the targets and the goals that we have set ourselves in 2020. So let us come up with yet another plan for conservation. So certainly an important point for consideration. But of course, as you know, a lot of these are shaped by the inputs from the countries, because the convention is a process that considers the inputs from countries. So certainly it's time, and certainly a group like the Africa Group of Negotiators have a very, very important role in providing these inputs. And certainly the contributions made during this event is also extremely valuable and important for all of us. Any more comments, any more inputs at this point of time, colleagues? All right, a few more seconds. We can wait. Good. Okay, looks like there are no more requests to the floor. Am I correct? Is any one of colleagues on this particular meeting wanting to take the floor? I'm just trying to scan through my computer to pick up, but I don't see any. So I assume that we do not have any more interventions at this point of time. And certainly, it's then a great moment to wrap up the meeting. And just a few points. As I mentioned, that I know this particular meeting, this particular briefing is intended or designed as a part of a larger framework program that UNEP is implementing for Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific regions. Of course, it's a 5-year program, and we are in the 2nd year of the program technically, but practically we are in the 1st year of the program. And our intent of engaging with this kind of a conversation, not only for countries in Africa and colleagues from Africa, but also for Pacific and the Caribbean. We had a similar briefing for Caribbean yesterday and for Pacific today morning, as I mentioned before, is to actually elicit some of these kinds of inputs and responses, and also trying to connect colleagues and countries within the region, but also across the regions. For example, when we were having the Pacific meeting today, one of the very strong recommendation that came out of the briefing was that, look, there are so many issues that are very, very relevant to islands, small island developing states. Things like island biodiversity, things like impacts of climate change on the biodiversity of islands, things like invasive alien species. But then we still do not have, or we require, I won't say do not have, we still require more and more opportunities and platforms to communicate across regions. So we actually have, discussed the options and opportunities for Pacific and the Caribbean, meeting to discuss about some common ideas, common issues, common positions, and things like that as well. So certainly in that context, given the experience and given the structured way the Africa region is moving towards providing inputs into the CBD process currently, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, development, implementation plans, and all that, certainly the regions other than Africa would also benefit from your expertise, from your vision, and from your inputs. And the project can offer an opportunity to facilitate that kind of an exchange. And of course, it is not something which, as a project manager, that's going to be pushed. But if you feel like there is an opportunity to communicate, to keep in touch, I mean, there was a mention of South-South cooperation. This also can be a brilliant opportunity for us to engage with countries in the other regions. We'll be more than happy to help and facilitate that kind of an opportunity. The second point is that, of course, the Africa Group of Negotiators is a formal mechanism that is providing inputs. And our intent, not only from UNEP, but also through the African Union Commission, who is the regional partner for us in implementing this project, would be more than happy to engage with you much more closely and see where we can have an opportunity to not just collaborate, but also trying to identify ways and means of building capacity. And the interest is also not just to run towards COP15, where the biodiversity framework would be adopted, but also to see how this can be implemented in the few years to come as well. So we certainly look forward to working with the African Group of Negotiators, but also countries and colleagues within the region. But in the event, if there is any specific interest in terms of identifying, I mean, looking at any capacity needs or information needs and things like that, please feel free to reach out. Our intent is to learn from you, but at the same time create an opportunity for us to learn and also exchange these experiences across the other regions as well. So your inputs are extremely valuable and important, and we certainly would like to engage and then see what best can be done. And of course, the idea is not to tick the box in the project that we have done so many of these briefing meetings, but it is to ensure that sincerely we make an effort to connect, is to hear and also elicit some of these kinds of interventions and ideas so that they can be scaled up, they can be, the voice can be enhanced in different platforms and fora, and we'll be more than happy to engage with all of you in that. So, with that, I'd like to sort of close the meeting, and then thanks to all of you for participating in the meeting, and a very, very special thanks to the chair of SBI 3 meeting, Charlotte, and also secretary of SBI 3, Jyoti, Martha Philip, colleagues from the CBD Secretariat. I see Neil Pratt, Claudia Kerala, who have joined us from the Secretariat, colleagues from UNEP, Ladu and Rosemary, who actually helped me put this entire thing together, Levis Kavagi, who provided some inputs on the discussions, the overall focus of the African group of negotiators, and to all of you participants for your time and interest. And we hope to keep in touch and engage with you as we move forward. So with that, thank you very much for your inputs. Thank you very much for your interest, and stay safe, and let's keep talking as we move forward. So we certainly require your inputs and guidance in the days to come, weeks to come, and months to come. Thank you very much, and have a great day, great afternoon, great evening, great day, wherever you are. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bala. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.